Hey friends, it's Laurie. Today I'm sharing a rustic pine cone kissing ball, a Farmhouse Christmas Star, and a winter holiday pedestal. Most of my supplies came from the Dollar Tree, the moose that came from Walmart, and I used some things that I had on hand. I hope you have fun crafting with me, so let's get busy. I'm starting this DIY by using a ball that I found in the toy department at the Dollar Tree. I'm going to cover it and I'm using some of their burlap. To make it easier to work with, I did press it out with my iron. The easiest way to cover the ball I found was to cut my burlap into strips. I cut them at about 2 inches, but to be honest, some were a little bigger and some were a little smaller, and it won't matter because all of it will be hidden. To cover the ball, I'm using my glue gun. I'm placing down some hot glue and then attaching one of the strips. With that one in place, I then added on my second. As I'm adding the pieces of burlap, I don't have any plans on where I'm placing them. I'm just adding them on and covering the ball. If you don't have burlap on hand, you can always use fabric or even wrap the ball in nautical rope. You'll need some type of hot glue friendly base that you can attach the pine cones to. If you end up using burlap, be sure to use some type of finger protector. You can get burned so easy that hot glue seeps right through it. When the ball was pretty much covered, I did cut a couple of the strips in half, and I used those to cover the open space. As I was adding the burlap, I did try to wrap it as tightly as I could around the ball, but it definitely wasn't perfect, and not to worry because no one will ever see it. To make a hanger for my kissing ball, I'm using 1.5-inch white ribbon that I had on hand. You can use any style or color of ribbon or even rope. Just be sure that it's strong enough to hold the weight of the pine cones. I cut a piece at 36 inches and I added some hot glue onto the ball. I then attached one end of the ribbon. I made a large loop with the ribbon, and now I'm attaching the other end slightly over the first. I then wrapped the ribbon around the ball and pulled it tightly at the top. I then used a piece of floral wire and twisted the ribbon tightly against the ball. I snipped off the excess wire and then made sure that the ball was hanging straight. To hold everything in place, I then hot glued the ribbon to the burlap. To cover my kissing ball, I'm using some of the smaller pine cones. They've freshly fallen from the tree, so I need to dry them out. I placed them on a lined cookie sheet in the oven at 200 degrees for about 10 minutes or so. This will dry up any sap and make them easier to work with. I used about 45, but depending on the size, the amount will vary. I'm adding a generous amount of hot glue on the top of the ball and attaching my first pine cone. I'm adding on more hot glue and attaching my next 3 around the hanger. I held mine in place for a couple of seconds to give the hot glue a chance to cool. As I'm adding on each pine cone, I'm placing them together as tightly as possible. With those 4 in place, I'm continuing on, adding hot glue and attaching my pine cones. As you're adding on the pine cones, the kissing ball will start to get fairly heavy. That's why it's important to choose the right hanger to support the weight. If you have access to these pine cones like I do, these kissing balls work up super quick. And with the pine cones being free, they make a really nice, inexpensive, handmade holiday gift. Now that I have all the pine cones attached to the ball, I'm going to add on some accents. And this is when you can personalize it and add on anything that you'd like. I'm adding on some greenery and I'm using this stem from the Dollar Tree. I clipped each one free from the main branch. Some of the greenery was a bit longer than the others, so I snipped those in half to keep them all a uniform size. I then just started adding on some hot glue and randomly attaching them in some of the open spaces between the pine cones. This is the greenery that I chose for my kissing ball, but you can always pop in some holly or some pine or pretty much anything you'd like. I'm making mine for Christmas, so I am adding in a few more things. But I think if you're looking for a natural rustic farmhouse piece, you could stop after adding in the greenery and hang this up throughout the winter season. I'm adding on 2 ribbon accents, a 7/8 inch buffalo check ribbon, this came from Michael's, and a 5/8 inch farmhouse ribbon, and this came from Dollar Tree. I'll be attaching my ribbon together using some small pieces of floral wire. I cut 10 pieces of the buffalo check ribbon and 10 of the farmhouse ribbon at 8 inches each. I'm folding each ribbon in half to find the center and then hot gluing each tail into the middle. I gave it a little pinch in the center, wrapped a piece of floral wire around it, and then twisted it tightly in the back. I then opened up the loops and snipped off the extra wire. With that complete, I followed the same instructions for the rest of my ribbons. For the larger open areas on my kissing ball, I'm adding on the buffalo check ribbon and the farmhouse ribbon side by side. To help push them into place, I'm using the end of a wooden skewer from the Dollar Tree. I added some hot glue into one of the openings and then placed in my 2 ribbons. I added 6 sets of the 2 ribbons together in the larger openings, and then I added my last 8 ribbons individually in the smaller openings. As I was adding them, I didn't have any set pattern. Pretty much where I saw an opening is where I added them. When all my sets of ribbons were in place, I then went ahead and added the singles. You can leave this as is in its natural form, but because I'm making mine for Christmas, I'm going to give it a snowy accent, and I'll be using some white acrylic paint. I grabbed my paintbrush, and this part was really fun because I just started adding the white paint here and there. Because this is a Christmas kissing ball, I'm adding on some red berries. I already had mine on hand and they come in groups of 2 and 3, but you can find these at the Dollar Tree. I used my glue gun and evenly spaced them between the pine cones. If you want to hang this past the winter holidays, instead of adding in the red berries, you could always add in some white, blue, or even silver. And now that I'm done adding my last group of berries, this pretty rustic farmhouse kissing ball is ready for the holidays. If you're new to my channel, please consider clicking on that little red subscribe button below, leaving me a thumbs up, and to all my returning friends, you know I'm always so happy to see you. To make my farmhouse Christmas star, I'm using one of the wooden stars from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to paint it white with my white acrylic paint, but before I do, I'm removing the hanger. Now that my star has dried, I'm going to be adding on some stick accents. I'm using some pawpaw branches. They grow pretty straight, and I have these trees in my yard. If you're not in an area where you can find fairly straight branches, you can always use some of the wooden dowels from the Dollar Tree. I'm measuring a bit longer and marking one of the sticks along the side of the star point. I cut it to size and then make 9 more. I'm attaching them onto the star using my E6000. I placed it along the points of the star and then attached my sticks. This is a rustic holiday star, so as you're adding the branches, if they're not matching up perfect, not to worry. I'm going to paint my sticks with the same white acrylic paint, but I wanted to show you what they looked like in case you decide to leave them natural. I'm using another stick. I made sure that it was thick enough to hide the hanger hole, and I measured it from top to bottom. After measuring it and marking it with my pencil, I then cut it. I found its placement, making sure to cover the hanger hole. I'm measuring 4 more pieces off the point of the star and the center stem. I'm going to measure, mark, cut them, and put them into place. When I have all 5 in place, I then use my E6000 to permanently attach them. If you like the all-white star like I do, first attach your sticks and then give it a complete coat of paint. If you don't like the white, you can always paint it light brown or gray or pretty much any color you'd like. I gave the E6000 a little time to set up, and now I'm covering the sticks with my white acrylic paint. With the paint dry, I'm using my pencil and I'm giving the sticks an accent. All you need to do is make some random lines here and there with your pencil, and then I'm just rubbing them in with my fingers. This is super easy and you can't mess it up. As you're adding the lines and you rub them in, it starts to look like pieces of birch. I worked my way around the outside and the inside of the star. So when they're done, they all have that pretty birch accent. With my star complete, I'm adding on some of this snow greenery, and I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. I used my clippers and snipped them into individual stems. Some came two to a stem, so I just snipped them off so they were separate. I have 8 pieces of greenery and I first want to find their placement on the star. I placed 4 pieces on one side and 4 on the other. To hold them in place, I ran my hot glue back and forth over the stems. For my next layer, I'm adding on 2 green leaves. I already had these on hand and they'll match the green in my ribbon. To hold them both in place, I added on some hot glue. I'm adding on a bow using this pretty Christmas plaid ribbon. I had this on hand, but you can pick up similar styles at the Dollar Tree or Michael's. I measured my ribbon against the star and then just made a simple bow. I then cut the 2 tails at an angle. Now that you're done, you can always leave your bow as is, but I want mine to look a little more rustic, so I'm cutting away the finished edge. When I'm done, I'm pulling against the ribbon to give it a little fray. If you don't want to add Christmas colors to this farmhouse star, you can always add on a plain ribbon or even burlap. And if you prefer more of a finished look, just leave the edges as is. I'm adding my finished bow to the star first by placing down some hot glue, and then attaching the bow to the center. To keep with that rustic vibe, I'm using a piece of jute and I'm making a small simple bow for the center of my star. Now that I'm done, I'm attaching it with some hot glue. I'm adding on some berries and I'm using some of this red berry garland from the Dollar Tree. I cut it into 6 pieces, about 3.5 to 4 inches, and then I tucked it under the bow. I added 3 pieces on one side and then 3 on the other. I added on some hot glue to hold each in place. For my hanger, I'm using a matching piece of jute. I cut it at 14 inches and hot glued the 2 ends on the back. To give it a little bit of extra strength, I hot glued 2 pieces of the matching ribbon over the ends. And with that, this pretty farmhouse Christmas star is ready to hang. Getting started, I'm using a metal vase from the Dollar Tree and it measures 6 inches in height. I'm using it as a base and I'm turning it upside down. To raise it up a bit, I think this is a ring holder and I did find this at the Dollar Tree. I turned it upside down and removed the label from the bottom. And now using my E6000, I'm attaching the 2 together. I made sure as I attached the 2 pieces that the top was centered perfectly on the bottom. I let it set up for about 3 hours and then sprayed it with some white spray paint. I'm using some of the Dollar Tree floral foam and it comes in 4 sections. I only need 3, so I'll be saving the other one for another project. I'm using my glue gun to glue one on top of the other. I'm then gluing the third on the side. I need my block to be in an oval shape, so I'm using my knife to cut away the excess and turn it into an oval. To add it onto my base, I'm adding a generous amount of hot glue onto the top, centering the foam and then pushing it down into the base. To cover the top of my pedestal, I'm using some of the Dollar Tree green garland. I added some hot glue under the base and attached the end of the garland. I then continued adding the hot glue and wrapping the garland around the foam. When I came to the top, I kept wrapping it around until the foam was completely covered. I'm using a stem of white poinsettias along with some greenery and a pine cone, and I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. I used my clippers and cut them all free from the main stem. In addition to my flowers, I'm also using some greenery from some Dollar Tree picks. They're sprigs of pine, and I'll be using 5. I'm spacing my 5 pieces of pine evenly around the top of the pedestal and tucking them in between the greenery. To keep my pine pieces in place, I'm giving each a dot of hot glue. I'm adding on my 5 poinsettia flowers, and I'm evenly spacing them around the top. I'm placing my last poinsettia next to my first so that the front has 2. And now, just like the pine pieces, I'm adding some hot glue to help hold them in place. I'm adding on some pine cones, some from my Dollar Tree picks and some that I already had on hand. I made sure they were on the smaller side, and I do have 8, but I ended up only using 7. I added some hot glue onto the greenery and then pressed down my pine cones. Just like my greenery and the poinsettias, I evenly spaced them around the top of the pedestal. I'm adding on some smaller greenery. I picked this up at the Dollar Tree and the color's just a bit lighter than the pine. I used my clippers and I clipped it free from the main stem. With them all cut, I'm now placing them into some of the open areas on my pedestal. After they're cut, the wire stems, it makes them easy to push into that floral foam. I always like adding natural elements into my project, so I went outside and I snipped some branches off of my birch tree. Any type of branches will work, and if you don't have access to some, not to worry, you can just skip this step. They're all quite long, so I did cut them down into shorter pieces. Once again, I didn't have any set plan. I just added some on the top and then some around the sides. The ends were pretty long, so I did just push them into that floral foam. You can leave your Christmas pedestal in neutral colors, but I'm going to be adding in some red berries. You can find them at the Dollar Tree. I'm using some that I already had on hand, and you can always change up the color. I'm adding in 6 berry clusters, and just like before, I'm placing them in some of the open spaces. Now that I'm done, I want my Christmas pedestal to look like it has freshly fallen snow on it. So I'm using some white acrylic paint and my paintbrush, and I'm just kind of adding a bit here and there. I made sure to accent the pine cones, the berries, and the sticks. On the bottom of the pedestal, where I attached the two pieces together, I want to hide that. You can always leave it, but I'm going to use some of the Dollar Tree nautical rope. I added some hot glue on the back of the pedestal where the two pieces met and attached the end of the rope. I wrapped the rope around the base 2 times, adding on hot glue to help hold it in place. After wrapping it 2 times, I stopped where I had begun, cut the rope, and then attached that end. I started with 8 pine cones and only added 7 to the pedestal, so I used my last one and attached that to the rope. As the topper on my farmhouse pedestal, I'm using a tin moose. This is a Christmas ornament and I found it at Walmart for $1.98. After removing the tags, I cut the hanging loop off with my scissors. I then painted it with some golden brown acrylic paint. I made sure that my moose on both sides had dried completely. I'm now using a light piece of sandpaper and gently sanding off the raised circles on the moose. You can leave it freshly painted if you like. I wanted to see more of the texture in the paint. Now that I'm done, I'm using my X-Acto knife, and to bring out just a hint of red on my ornament, I'm sketching around the outside edges of the moose. I don't want to take off a lot, just enough that it will accent the berries on the pedestal. You can see the moose has just a bit of red showing, and to add it to the pedestal, I'm placing it in the center and then just adding some hot glue. I think this came out so pretty and I can't wait to place it on my mantle. Here we are at the end of the video, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by, and I hope you had fun crafting with me. If you're new here and you'd like to come back and hang out with me again, don't forget to click that little red subscribe button below, and if you tap on the notification bell, you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. If you're looking for more Christmas or winter inspiration, I'll leave some videos linked at the end of this video. I hope you all stay safe and healthy, and I will see you soon. Bye, everybody!